I'm Stacy Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and I am the host of True Tales from Old Houses. Hello. I want to start out today with a few thank yous. Someone with the username Wavy Windows just started listening to True Tales from Old Houses, and they left a very kind review on Apple Podcasts. In fact, in the last month, the show has received a few new reviews on Apple Podcasts. All positive, thankfully. Your reviews and ratings do make a difference, and they help new people find the show. And every time you tell someone about True Tales from Old Houses or share it on social media, that is a huge help too. And I'm so grateful for your support. If you are so moved, there is still a donate button over on the True Tales from Old Houses website where you can make a one-time or reoccurring donation. And I'm still sending out the coffee mugs with the True Tales from Old Houses logo on it to listeners who donate in the $25 range or more. Now, this season, we do have a few commercial sponsors, so I am not going to mention that donate button every time. Just know that it's there and that I use all monetary support to pay the podcast bills and to keep improving the show. Now, speaking of gratitude, I got a very nice text this week from my friend Dale. Dale is a running buddy of mine, and he's shown up on the Blake Hill House blog several times, including recently when I built interior storm windows for my office. He's a long-time woodworker, hobbyist, and when he retired a few years ago, he set up a very nice workshop, which he kindly allows me to use when I need it. And he's been really great about teaching me how to use new tools, too. Right now, I'm working on the grand staircase here at Blake Hill House, and it is one of those jobs that has snowballed into something much larger than I wanted. I mean, 7 years into this whole house preservation project, I'm not naive. Projects, well, they take as long as they take, right? But this one is the gift. It just keeps on giving. Every time I dig into one task, it explodes into a few more. I mean, just as an example, first it looked like I was only going to have to restore maybe 6 balusters. Now it looks like all 29 on the staircase are going to need an overhaul. Probably the biggest nightmare is that someone painted latex over oil paint without a proper bonding primer. But there's also failing wood filler, balusters with hairline cracks and broken altogether. You name it. It's all normal old house stuff, and I'm not bitter, I assure you. But being on the receiving end of at least 40 years worth of incompatible products and methods is no fun at all. And since this staircase is the jewel of Blake Hill House, I need to make it right. Feeling a little bit of pressure. So I outlined all of that on the blog, which my friend Dale reads. Getting back to Dale. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. After that article dropped, he sent a text, and it was sympathetic about the project creep. If you haven't heard that term, project creep is exactly what I described earlier. It's when the project keeps escalating rather than unfolding as it was outlined in the original plan. I imagine that many of you have experienced project creep at some point in your old house project. Anyway, Dale wrote, and I quote, "Should you ever decide it's getting disheartening due to the large scale, I'm more than willing to give you a hand." And my initial response was to fire back, and I'm fine. I don't need any help. I mean, these T-Rex arms and my stubborn personality haven't let me down yet. And I began to tap out my response. Tap, 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 tap. And then I thought, wait, what is wrong with me? Why would I turn down this offer? Take the help. Delete, 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 delete. And I wrote back, tap, tap, tap. I'm disheartened, and I would love some help. And just like that, the Grand Staircase project at Blake Hill House is back on track. Dale is going to help me, and I am excited to get back to work. So if you are also faced with a daunting project, maybe consider finding help for a portion of it. And for goodness sakes, if someone offers to lend a hand, say yes right away. Say yes. I will be posting regular updates on the blog if anyone is interested in following along. And my blog is blakehillhouse.com, which I will link in the show notes. All right, I want you to know that today's show is sponsored by Plunger. That's Plunjr. If you have a plumbing problem, download the Plunger app for iPhone or Android, open it up, and push the Talk to a Plumber Now button. In less than a minute, you'll be connected with a professional plumber who will help you diagnose your problem and come up with a do-it-yourself plan to fix it. The first call is free. After that, if you opt to move forward, you'll schedule a paid follow-up call to complete your plumbing project with as much or as little hand-holding as you need from a licensed plumber from Plunger. Have I told you I replaced my kitchen faucet and garbage disposal with the help of Plunger? That's kind of a trick question, because if you follow me on Instagram, read my blog, or listen to the podcast, of course you know, because I cannot stop talking about it. I am just so happy that I did it without the extra trips to the hardware store and nary a swear word either. Almost unheard of. I ordered all of my parts from Plunger, which you can do too, or provide your own, your choice. Aaron from Plunger talked me through the installation process in about 90 minutes. Boom, new faucet and garbage disposal. Again, download the app, open it, and press Talk to a Plumber now. The first call is free, and if you mention, this is important, if you mention True Tales from Old Houses, you'll get 10% off your parts order from Plunger. That's Plunjr, the Plunger app. All right, announcements. I don't actually have any new announcements for you today, but I am going to repeat the save the date from the Window Preservation Standards Collaborative. They're hosting the 5th annual Window Preservation Summit at the Pine Mountain Settlement School in Bledsoe, Kentucky, September 26th through October 1st, 2021. And I think I may have said those dates wrong last time, but September 26th through October 1st is correct, and I'll post a link to the summit right on the show notes. Now, if you're part of a nonprofit organization that is hosting an event that is relevant to our listeners, please do reach out to me through the True Tales from Old Houses website, and I'd be happy to announce it on an upcoming episode. It's time for Q&A, and I have invited a friend to come on the show and help me out. Let's see who's here today.
Hello?
It's Bill. Hi, Bill. Bill Chapman from Enon Hall.
Hey, Stacy. How's it going?
Good. It's so nice to hear your voice again.
Likewise.
Thank you for coming back this season to join me for Q&A. Are you ready for today's question?
Sure.
All right. This is fun for me because I always get to throw it at my guests first, so be prepared.
Okay. You're making me nervous.
Yeah, you always get to give the first answer. And then if you say something really smart, then I can just jump off that.
Okay, we'll see how it goes.
All right. Well, you have been working on an old house, Enon Hall, longer than anyone I know, which makes you highly qualified to answer today's question. And it is, how do you keep your momentum?
Oh, wow. Well, I suppose we might need to clarify what you mean by momentum, because in my high school physics, I remember that momentum goes both ways. It could go uphill and it could also go downhill. So I assume we're talking about forward momentum.
Sure. Yeah, and prevent. How do you prevent backward momentum? Yes.
Yeah, there you go. That's a great question, and I tend to think of our projects more in terms of endurance and perseverance, and momentum for me is when you get into a project of seeing it through to fruition and to completion. And what I find is that it's really easy to maintain that momentum when you are deconstructing. And then the momentum stops when you reach the point where you've got to put it back together and to rebuild. Because demo is easy, demo is fun, anybody can do demo. But then you reach the point where you stop and are scratching your head. So for me, the biggest preventers or blocks to momentum are when I lose confidence in where I go from here, of feeling confident that I've got the plan, that I have the expertise, that I have the skills, and that can make me stall out. So I think, for me at that point, it's reaching out to other folks who've been down the road on those projects and getting some advice, and getting off of stuck is the best way to maintain that momentum. How about you? Where have you run into this challenge in your projects?
Well, I am not. People think of me as really organized, and they think of me as a list maker. And
I'm seeing all the labels on your storage compartments. You got to be organized.
Yeah, so I am, but there's a lot up here. So I think what helps me keep the momentum is I have to know that there is an end. Now, I think that all of us who are working on old houses know that the end doesn't mean the house is done. I just mean each project needs to have an end. And that end might not be, it might just be like a cliffhanger, ready for the next installment of the next part of the project. But that's usually how I keep going, is just to make sure that I know what the end is. Because if I leave it too open, then I start to get really overwhelmed with the tools out or the debris all over or, the big mess. And every time somebody asks me, when are you going to be done? I get really sensitive and cranky about it because it's just too open-ended. So I guess that's how I keep my momentum for project to project. Now, if you were going to talk about the bigger picture, though, I mean, obviously, we just said old houses are never done. So that is not the end. But how would you keep the momentum for something that was a very large scale, maybe a somewhat overwhelming project? Do you have any ideas for that?
I think number one is not setting a deadline. I mean, we are at the point now. I mean, for several years, we were in a period where we were working against a deadline, and now we're back to our normal lives and trying to have lives beyond just work on the house. So I think the best way to persevere and to have endurance is not to set deadlines that create stress. The other part of it too is that I love working on our house, and I love the slow, gradual process of improving and restoring room after room and space after space. And I don't know what other hobby I would enjoy as much. So I'm not setting aside other hobbies in order because I have to work on the house. Working on the house is my hobby. So I think if you bring that kind of passion, if you're able to bring that kind of passion to your projects, then it doesn't become drudgery and it's your hobby.
Right. I'm kind of getting a kick out of our conversation because you're like, the best way is to not set a deadline. Am I like, the best way is to set an ending?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think maybe that's the lesson here, is that you kind of have to find out what works for your personality and make sure you're tailoring your projects to match your personality instead of matching someone else's. And I think that was a pitfall for me for a while. I kept looking around on Instagram and blogs and seeing people do things a certain way. And I hit my head against that brick wall for 3 years trying to do that thing that everybody told me, or the method that everybody told me would work. And it just didn't fit.
And you have to find the solution that fits your life and your lifestyle, or, whether you have small kids in the house or not, whether you're working full time or not, we all have to figure out how to make it work within our own constraints and our own lives.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I like that you said is that, now you're interested in you're always interested in doing this work, but you also want to have a life outside of this work too. And that's a really important thing maybe for some people to hear. Maybe not everybody, but some people need to hear that there is life beyond fixing up your old house, and maybe spending a little bit of time in that other world will give you the excitement for the project again. So taking a little break even.
Absolutely. And by taking a break, you might find the inspiration that you bring back to a project. We found inspiration in England that applied to a project. It was like, there's the answer that for something that had stalled out, the little house that we rented in England. Like, that's what we need to do.
That's neat. All right. Well, that's all good stuff, Bill. Thank you very much for answering this. I guess I don't have anything else to add. Do you have anything else to add, or do you feel like we kind of covered it?
Keep the faith.
Thanks for being here today, Bill.
Great to chat with you.
All right. Bye. Now it's your turn. This season, I have a question for you as a listener, and it is, what is the weirdest or most surprising thing you ever found in your old house? Now, no one left a voicemail for me, but I did get a few answers to the question via the contact form on the website. Caitlin sent me a photo of an electrical outlet right next to a shower drain. Surprise! Water and electricity don't mix. That's crazy, right? And Sophie on Instagram said that the weirdest or most surprising things she found in her old house were doll heads in the walls. Not dolls, doll heads. Now, my cursory research taught me that dull heads might have been put there to absorb any bad luck directed at the human occupants, but I really think we need to get a folklore expert to come on this show and unpack all of that. I think these weird things are going to come up throughout the season. So if you know a folklore expert, please do send them my way. And I want to hear your answers all season, so please visit the True Tales from Old Houses website, and on the bottom right-hand side, you'll see a microphone icon. Click on that microphone and you can leave a voicemail answer, which I might share on an upcoming episode of the show. Please answer in a complete sentence and don't be shy. You can leave that voicemail using your phone or even your computer as long as it has a microphone. Now, your privacy is important, so rest assured that any messages you leave will not be shared without your permission. So thank you, Caitlin and Sophie, for taking the time to answer the question about the weirdest or most surprising thing you ever found in your old house. Today's guests are local to me, so I took a quick trip downtown to interview them for the show. Darren and his friends started the Tool Library, a lending library for tools, about 10 years ago. I found out about the organization last fall, and I thought the idea of a tool lending library was absolutely brilliant. What a resource. So to talk about how the Tool Library works and the sharing economy, I'm happy to introduce you to Darren Cotton and Maddie Hamilton.
Hi, I'm Darren Cotton. I'm president and founder of the Tool Library.
I'm Maddie Hamilton. I am the new economies coordinator at the Tool Library.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. And it is a real treat to get to talk to people on location. Normally, everyone that I interview is remote, so this is really great. I appreciate you having me here.
Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, you're semi-local to me, so it was just a short drive. Lots of snow where I live this morning, so it was a little bit of a tricky drive, but here I am. Well, I found the Tool Library flyer at one of the architectural salvage shops, and I was immediately taken with the idea because most of my listeners are fixing up old houses, and the startup cost of amassing a personal tool collection can be overwhelming, especially for tools that are used infrequently. Tool rental is an option, but of course that comes with high fees and usually a very tight timeline to complete the work. So this excites me. I love this. I love the idea. So Darren, why don't you start and explain the basics of this tool library and the sharing economy just to get our listeners up to speed?
Sure. So the way the Tool Library works, very similar with your standard book library, but instead of borrowing books, obviously people are borrowing tools. So people can sign up for annual memberships. We have 3 different tiers, $20, $50, and $100. So for $20 a year, people can get access to up to 5 tools at a time for up to a week at a time. And we did just do some tabulation for this past year, and the average tool value that someone's taking out is about $61. So again, most people are making their membership fee back the first time they borrow a tool.
Right.
And the goal here really is to increase access and to remove cost as a barrier for people who are trying to fix up their home. Lots of people who are first-time gardeners trying to grow their own food, as well as supporting a lot of community-based initiatives, tree plantings, public art, community gardens, those sorts of things. Again, really trying to remove cost as a barrier, and sharing is a really great way to do that.
Great. How did you start the tool library? I mean, honestly, how did this come about?
Sure. So I was a grad student at the time at UB, living off campus in the University Heights neighborhood, which, if anyone's familiar, there are a lot of really lovely historic homes in the area. It's one of the, I guess, quote unquote, newer sections of the city, if you consider the 1920s and 30s to be new. But I was living with a bunch of friends in an apartment, and unfortunately, we had a landlord who was not so great on the upkeep. So we kind of decided that, we thought we were handy enough. We could do a few things here and there to really kind of improve our quality of life. But obviously, as broke college students, not really having access to the resources that we needed to go to Home Depot or a big box store and purchase these tools. So that's really where, the idea for the tool library came from, knowing that I was in this situation as a student renter and, knowing that other people across the neighborhood and across the city could probably benefit from a place where they could access the tools that they needed to fix up their homes and apartments.
Right. Okay, let me stop you for just a minute so that we can give people a picture. Now, we're in Buffalo, New York. I guess I really didn't specify that when I sat down. I know where I am. You know where you are. But maybe the people who are listening don't know where we are. So let's explain a little bit about this neighborhood, University Heights. You said it's newer, 1910s, 1920s. Tell us a little bit about what the rentals are like there, because they're not apartment. I mean, they're apartments, but they're really houses divided up. So give us a picture there.
Sure. So I guess the vernacular language would be the Buffalo double. So it's basically, if you were looking at the house, you might not know that it was 2 units, but it's basically 1 unit on the ground floor and then 1 unit on the second floor. And that's kind of like the standard Buffalo rental. And University Heights, the name University Heights comes from the fact that we're located right near the University at Buffalo's South Campus, right on the edge of Buffalo and the adjoining suburb, Amherst. So it was one of the later areas to be developed and got developed kind of because of the university relocating there. Unfortunately, today, I think a lot of people see this neighborhood as quick money. So, renting to students, being able to kind of extract as much money as you can out of a property without putting little, if nothing, back into it. And so that was really the issue that I was trying to address head on with something like the tool library.
Right. And what kind of problems were you facing with your rental? What kind of things did you want to fix?
I mean, a lot of it obviously was cosmetic. So just bathrooms that hadn't been updated in 20, 30 years, peeling wallpaper, chipping and peeling paint. So again, stuff that we felt comfortable being able to tackle, but something that obviously was not very high on the priority list of our landlord. Obviously there were additional issues that we weren't qualified for, non-functioning heating systems, drafty windows, all the sorts of things that I'm sure people with old homes are familiar with. But, we were trying the best that we could as students to, improve and invest in a space that we were calling home.
Yes, Buffalo's sort of full of rental sections. I mean, there's room for lots of different types of housing in Buffalo because it is a big city. But unfortunately, certain regions do get overlooked as far as, they're known for being areas where landlords don't invest in their properties and don't take care of the people who live in their houses. And I think that's really sad. It's a really stark contrast to some of the other historic neighborhoods in town that are just completely kept up, historically accurate restoration, preservation. I don't know. Do you happen to know, what percent, could you ballpark how many old houses there are in Buffalo? It seems like they're all old, like 50 years or older. There's very few. I can't even think of a new build, quite frankly.
It's something like 90% of Buffalo's housing stock was built before 1978, I think.
Okay.
We had to find that figure that was sometime around then is when lead paint was banned. So most of Buffalo's housing qualifies as maybe having lead paint. But it's one of the oldest housing stocks in the country in Buffalo.
It does not surprise me. Even where I live south of the city, I think our inventories, I would guess it at least that high as well, 85. When you start getting to the outskirts, maybe some newer ones, but it's very, very rare. So that's really interesting. Before it became a university neighborhood, do you know why it was built in the first place? Was it just basically to support the grain industry that was so large and prevalent here in Buffalo?
So the university moved to present day South Campus, I think around 1913, 1914. Prior to that, the main administration building was actually the Erie County Alms House. So it was where, people who were considered poor and destitute were, it was an opportunity for them to have a place to live and somewhere to have regular meals. And so when the university decided that they were going to move to the Alms House, that's really where we saw an explosion of residential development around this area. Up until that point, it was, they called it the Great Plains because it was literally just like meadows and pastures. So a lot of it was farming land. You had one or two outposts here and there, but up until, the 1910s, 1920s, this area was largely undeveloped.
Yeah, Buffalo is a planned city, but I don't think that plan in the 1800s extended out this far.
Okay. I should mention, too, that I'm a transplant to the area. I just passed the 7-year mark, so I am still learning the history of the entire region. And I moved from out west, so I didn't just move from a different part of New York. I'm not from here at all. All right, so let's get back to the tool library. It's really interesting. It kind of establishes a picture of where you live and how the tool library can help people in this area. So you wanted to start the tool library. I mean, how does one do that?
Sure. There is no magic formula, unfortunately. Although I will say I was really lucky that there was a really supportive online community of people who had founded and were running tool libraries sort of across the country. This was back in 2011 when things like Google Groups were still super popular. So I stumbled upon a tool library Google group and just, not having to start from scratch. So whether it was how to go about finding an insurance carrier that will actually cover a tool library to just your standard documents like membership applications, waivers, and indemnifications, all that good stuff. So again, I think one of the beautiful things about the sharing economy is that people are so willing to help one another because they understand the impact and the value that things, related to the sharing economy can add to communities. So it's just a really welcoming, generous community. Having all those, initial steps covered for us, I was able to work with a friend who was getting his MBA at the university to put together a preliminary business plan of, how the tool library would function, who our market would be. And then we applied for a small seed grant from the city of Buffalo from one of our local council members. So I got $15,000 as a 22, 23-year-old and was like, oh man, this is like actually happening. This is real. I'm starting a tool library.
So did that $15,000 feel like $1 million at that point?
Yes, it did. And now like having, 10 years of experience and just lots of background in grant writing, it's like, wow, that is really just such a drop in the bucket when it comes to these sorts of projects.
Right. Is this the first location? Have you always been at this location?
So we actually started about 3 blocks further down Main Street in a much smaller space. And we moved here in January of 2013. So we've been here for about 8 years.
And it's tool library mythology that it started with 3 rakes on a wall. So all the tools you see around you now were not here back then.
Wow. Yeah. So let's talk about where you get these tools.
Sure. So, I would say probably 75% of the tools that you see have been donated either by individuals or businesses, corporations, that sort of thing. And then the rest, we do have a small annual budget where we're able to kind of go out and fill in the gaps for things that we might not have that have been requested, kind of those higher end items. But even today after this podcast, I'm going to Ace Hardware, one of our local hardware stores. They're donating about $1,000 worth of tools to us just because they believe in the mission and they understand that, the more people who feel confident and comfortable in tackling these projects, the more customers they have. We like to think of ourselves not as competition, but as collaborators. So it really has just kind of been taking whatever we can get and working with businesses and corporations to help them understand the value that something like the tool library can bring.
Right. So you are funded by memberships. You're funded, you said you talked about writing grants. You're also funded by, like you said, someone really kind like Ace who would donate $1,000 worth of tools to you. Is that your only funding, basically?
This is a great question. I feel much more prepared because we just went through a fund development boot camp, which is, I feel like, a super critical phase for a lot of nonprofits as they seek to grow and expand. All those sort of sources that you mentioned are where we get revenue from, but a big part of any nonprofit's sort of pro forma is fundraising. And obviously with the pandemic, that has kind of had us have to shift how we fundraise. So moving a lot of things online, using platforms like Facebook to do crowdfunding. So Maddie helped us run a really successful Facebook fundraiser to raise about $1,000 so we could add a really high quality HEPA vac kind of looking to get into the lead abatement field and help homeowners who may have lead-based paint in their homes safely and affordably remediate those issues.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. We never did talk about this, so we can go backwards just a little bit, but what is your background? Maddie, what's your background?
Yeah, I grew up in Buffalo, and then I went out of town for school. And I studied architecture, and I'm interested in going back to school and becoming an architect, but I was drawn to the tool library because it's like about making spaces in alternative ways, making community through making spaces. And yeah, that really attracted me.
How about you, Darren?
I went to UB for a master's in urban planning, and I was really taken by the field of planning. Just kind of, it seemed like a really great way to make the world a better place, as cliched as that might sound. But I think one of the things that sort of frustrated me was that a lot of planning education is really based in theory. And I was really drawn to the fields of community development kind of within urban planning. And I feel like to actually practice community development is to just live in a community, to build relationships, to get to know your neighbors. And the tool library is just such a wonderful platform, I think, to do that and to really approach community development from a very grassroots perspective.
Well, let's talk about that. You segued that beautifully. Thank you very much without even knowing it. But I would like to know some of the unexpected maybe side effects of starting the tool library. I mean, I imagine when you start something, you're seeing it one way and then it kind of blossoms into something else. So can you talk about what happened in response to the tool library?
Sure. Kind of the genesis story was very much focused on the idea of being able to fix up homes, empowering people to take ownership over the places that they call home. But one of the things I think that continues to excite and encourage me about the tool library is thinking beyond just the individual and kind of looking at the community as a whole. And so we have all these tools. How can we as a community use these tools to tackle quality of life issues that we see in our own community? And so a really great example, I think, is actually walking distance from where we are. That's a neighborhood park, linear park. And for a long time, it was a neglected, underinvested green space serving the University Heights neighborhood. And so we started working with one of the local block clubs, the Heath Street Block Club. And I hear that block clubs are like a Buffalo-centric phenomenon. So for those that may have never heard of the term block club, it's basically like a neighborhood organization, just neighbors getting together to kind of try and solve issues on their street and on their block. So we were working with the Heath Street Block Club, just organizing regular cleanups of the park, working with the city to remove larger, brush. Unfortunately, it was a dumping ground for a lot of contractors, that sort of thing. And kind of through that process, we found out that there was federal funding to transform a vacant rail right-of-way running right alongside Linear Park into a rail trail. So we were able to work with that block club and work with the community. We've got about 3,000 petitions signed from residents saying that they wanted to see the city invest in this space. They wanted to see a rail trail. And the funding that the city had gotten was actually set to expire in 2015. And we were able to get the city to sign a lease about a month before the funding was set to expire. A year after that, the North Buffalo Rail Trail was constructed and completed. And now it's, I would say, one of the centerpieces of this community, something that is attracting new homeowners and new interest in this community. And it all started with, a bunch of neighbors getting together and cleaning up a park. So I think that's the power of the tool library and the sharing economy, is just one thing leads to another, which leads to another. It's just a really wonderful thing to be part of.
Right. I'm kind of an emotional person, so that kind of makes me I got all goosebumpy and stuff just thinking about how, meeting your neighbors. There's so many, I don't know. There's a lot of division, this idea that we just want to live in our house and not talk to anyone and just go to work and then go home. But when you're in a community, it serves everyone to invest yourself and get to know each other. So I'm really impressed by that. In fact, after we talk today, I'm going to walk down there. I got to go see it. Walk around the neighborhood a little bit. So also, I guess, I saw you did a TEDx talk. Is that correct? You did a TEDx Buffalo?
Yes, way back when.
Yeah. I think, what was it, 2011 or something? 2012?
2013, 2014.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot about that. But you were talking about there's some murals that came about in part, I guess, because of the tool library. Is that correct?
So that was another really interesting thing too. Like, what do we perceive as a tool? So obviously, we're surrounded by hammers, wrenches, sanders, saws in here right now, but thinking about things like mobile phones as tools. So we worked with someone who had been using mobile phones in developing countries as payment processing systems. So really, how can we use the mobile phone in unique and innovative ways? And one of the things we did in University Heights is use phones to track instances of graffiti. So we would actually do kind of community mapping days where people would come out. We would take pictures and geotag, where graffiti was in the neighborhood on a Google map. So we could kind of quickly search and figure out, well, we need this many people for this area. Here's how much supplies we need, and kind of using that as an opportunity not only to remove the graffiti, but find potential canvases for things like public art. And so again, even like across the street from the storefront, there's this big bright bird that I absolutely love. And just to see people like walk by and stop and look and take pictures, it's a really exciting thing. And that all kind of came about because, we were all walking around with a tool in our pocket that can do so many different things.
Sure. All right, Maddie, I'm going to turn to you. But as I understand it, you have been operating the tool library during the pandemic. And I'm just curious. I know the pandemic's affected everyone. So how is the tool library coping with that?
Yes. So the tool library was fully volunteer run prior to my coming on. So the shop was open 6 days a week, fully staffed by volunteers and run by the board. But this past year, they made the realization, the commitment through a strategic planning process that the things that the tool library needed to grow was a bigger space. As you can see, we're packed to the gills with tools, yes, and then also professional staff. So I was kind of the first step into having full-time staff. And I plan to come on. My onboarding date was March 16th. And that is pretty much the date that everything shut down in New York. So I did come on March 16th, and the tool library shut down for 6 weeks. Just in that beginning in the spring, nobody really knew what we were dealing with. And we used the time to kind of create a human-centered designed plan of how we can reopen during the pandemic. And at first we opened for we called it Tool Library to Go, where we used the space next door. We have a second storefront that had previously been used for like community gatherings, like art shows, events, and things. We obviously weren't doing those now. So we used that as the space to loan tools out of while the volunteer was in another space, kind of to cut down on contact. And we have just been tweaking that process ever since, depending on how New York State is doing with COVID. And it has been an interesting time to get to know the organization. The Tool Library runs a schedule of service events every year. And we sort of had to reimagine those as well. But the nice thing was that they're mostly outside in open spaces where volunteers are doing cleanups or planting trees and can be separated from one another. So it was great also to reimagine those in the time of COVID and still get to see the impact of that work come out this summer and this fall.
So if somebody wants a tool now, do they call you and ask for it and then you kind of do the handoff?
Yes, we are doing curbside service right now. So ordinarily, there would be a volunteer working here while we're open and anyone can walk right in and strike up a conversation and figure out what tool they need, etc. But right now, because we want to limit that kind of contact, we'd suggest that you would sign up for a membership online before coming in on our website, thetoolllibrary.org. You can do that very easily. And then you would call or text before you're planning to come in and just chat with the volunteer about what tool you needed. They would get it ready. And when you pull up or walk up, they'll bring it outside.
Right. Okay, great. And yes, you mentioned the toolllibrary.org. It's a beautiful website. So you can get all 3 types of memberships there. That's great. I guess anybody who could drive here could become a member. Is that correct? If you can walk here or drive here. So you don't, or do you limit it to a certain county, like the way a public library
Previously, we were just serving Erie and Niagara County. This summer, we opened up to all of Western New York. So all 9 counties, I think, of Western New York residents can come and become a member.
Do you ever see this expanding, like getting new branches in other locations that the way a library system might? Or are you just still right here, right now?
I mean, for us right now, it's hard to imagine that just because we know how much time and effort it takes to just run this location. But, one of the long-term visions in our strategic plan is this idea of satellite locations. And so again, whether that's us running multiple branches or whether that's us supporting other organizations, starting their own tool libraries, but working within a network, we're not exactly sure what that will look like. But again, I think with one of our sort of founding values being accessibility, obviously where you're located has a huge determination on how accessible you are to different populations. So yeah, as I tend to say, a turkey in every oven and a tool library in every neighborhood. That's the dream.
And we have had a lot of interest from other community groups so far this year in starting their own small tool libraries in whatever area they're working in. It's definitely part of the vision to either support these other people or get out there ourselves.
Right. That's interesting. My head automatically went to the Toolmobile. When I was young, we used to have the Bookmobile, and I lived in an extremely rural area, extremely rural. And so we had the Bookmobile that used to come around every 2 weeks and bring books. And I'd look out the window and run as fast as I could to the Bookmobile. I think as an adult, I would run just as fast to a Toolmobile right now. I really would. I think most of our listeners would. If you could offer some advice to someone. So this is a show that people listen to at a national level. I mean, obviously, I want to get the word out to Buffalo listeners, more local listeners. So there'll be show notes. I'll make sure that people who are or can be your patrons will know about this service. We are national, and I imagine that some people who are listening are thinking to themselves, this would be a great fit for my community. It may already be there, for one, or maybe they would like to start one. So do you have any advice? I mean, I know it's probably exhausting to educate people on the process of starting something when a lot of times it takes, you can start with Google and go from there.
Yeah, so I would say, again, to your point, there are lots of tool libraries around the country and honestly around the world. So first step is just to kind of see if there is one in your community. If there isn't, there's lots of different models for tool libraries out there. So some public library systems actually will run tool libraries as a part of what they do. So, always looking for partnerships and sort of institutions that are already established in the community. Some Habitat for Humanities I know will run tool libraries as well. But if there isn't one, in your local community and you're interested in starting, a really good place to start, I would say, is My Turn. And that's actually the platform that we use to track all the tools and track all our members. So that is really a foundational piece of what makes the tool library work, is actually being able to kind of have that database and have that back end. And so literally, reach out to My Turn, and let's say you've got 24 tools and a few friends who are interested, and maybe like someone's willing to lend their garage. You can inventory those items, get them up online, and just, start pushing that messaging that these things are available. And that's really, kind of how we got started, is just a handful of tools and a few members. And, today we've got 3,600 tools and probably 625 active members. So, start small, see if it works. And, with the tool library, we've just tended to attract, people who really identify with the mission and the vision. And I think those people are all over the place, all across the country. And so being able to have a place to kind of bring those people together, I think, is really important.
Is there anything else that you would want to add, Maddie, or anything you would want my listeners to know?
Well, Darren, I feel like just gave such an inspirational answer to that. I was thinking the challenges, when you're thinking of just like having a storefront open, I feel like the alternative that Darren presented is a really great idea to start small, because some of the biggest challenges that tool libraries face are just staffing the storefront. So that's my little addition.
And you said you're staffing with all volunteers.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I do have one more question, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. But is there a component of this tool library that's also like a fix-it shop? Did I understand that? Or was that pre-pandemic? Is that the goal for post-pandemic?
Sure. So we actually were approached by the City of Buffalo's recycling department. Again, they're always trying to come up with unique and innovative ways to divert more trash from landfills. And so they had been kind of looking at different models, and one of the models was repair cafes. And so this was a concept started, I think, back in 2008 in the Netherlands, because those Dutch are always on top of things like this. But basically, it was inviting members of the community to come and bring a broken item. So whether that was a vacuum, a lamp, a record player, a blender, just things that, you otherwise probably would have just thrown in the trash, but maybe you couldn't part with, to bring those items out to basically a monthly event where expert fixers, so these were retired mechanics, electricians, teachers, would come and kind of work alongside that person to troubleshoot what the issue was. And ideally, at the end of the session, they go home with a functioning item. And so again, the idea here was to really get people to rethink kind of our approach to disposability, and the idea of we're living in the age of Amazon, where when something breaks, we go online and just buy another one, and really realizing that we have to shift that mentality. If we do want to tackle things like climate change, we have to get back into this mindset of repairability and reusability. So we kind of launched a local version of that here that we call Dare to Repair Cafes. So our last one that we held was actually back in February of 2020, because it is an in-person event and, people are in close proximity. We couldn't continue that during the pandemic, but yeah, basically what we did, we had monthly events, usually in libraries or schools, where we would invite community members to come out with their broken items. And our hashtag was Fix It, Don't Ditch It. But at the end of that, I think we had hosted probably about a dozen events. We had diverted 3,100 pounds of potential trash from landfills. So these were things that were destined to be thrown out, that people walked away and had functioning items. It was just, again, a really great opportunity beyond just, saving people money, just kind of hearing the stories behind items, like someone would bring in their grandmother's lamp that had been in the basement and hadn't worked for like 40 or 50 years. So again, to kind of just see that personal connection and the impact that just something like a simple repair can have on someone's life. So we really want to get back to that. And again, as an all volunteer organization, we're kind of stretched, but is there an opportunity to transition that to a virtual format? There have been some repair cafes around the country that have done that. And it's basically just like a Ask Me Anything where the fixers are online and people can kind of zoom in and say, hey, I've got this lamp or I've got this, stand mixer that this doesn't seem to be working, and just kind of troubleshooting people over a video chatting platform.
Right. I love this part of the Tool Library's work and mission. I haven't been around for the Dare to Repair cafes because I've been here during the pandemic, but there's a fun statistic that's been floating around that the average power drill is only used for 12 minutes in its lifetime before it ends up thrown out. Because you think of like someone who goes to Sears, they need to put up some pictures or something, and then it sits in the closet. And I love that part of the ideology behind the Tool Library, that you don't need to own one of everything. And also, if it breaks, you can fix it. So
yeah, and to leave, what was your tagline? Something about a turkey in every oven and
a turkey in every oven and a tool library in every neighborhood.
That's right. Well, Maddie and Darren, thank you so much for being guests on the show today. It was, like I said, it's just a treat to be here on location and to meet you both and to hear all about the Tool Library. Again, it's toollibrary.org. I'll put all the pertinent information on the show notes for this episode, so anybody who has questions can check out the website, and anything that we've talked about today that requires a link will also be on the show notes too for easy access.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. All right, so thank you for listening to today's episode on location at the Tool Library in Buffalo, New York. Be sure to follow True Tales from Old Houses and Blake Hill House on Facebook and Instagram. And for more information about this episode, including show notes, transcripts, merchandise, and to sign up for the monthly newsletter, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.